This meeting is being recorded.
Now I'm unmuted. Okay, so let's see. Oh yeah, so I'm going to share my screen again. If there are any, you know, so at any time, you can stop me. You can raise your hand, wave. You can unmute yourself and say, "Hey," or whatever. There's several people who can't make it tonight. So it's a smaller group than usual, but it's usually a fairly small group anyway. So it's really good to have discussion back and forth, asking questions, making points, bringing up things that have occurred to you or whatever. Do either of you, Deborah or Camille, have anything you want to raise or talk about preemptively? Okay, well then I'll go ahead and start, and please do feel free to interrupt, ask questions, point out mistakes or anything like that. Let's see. I'm having trouble getting this bar to behave properly. Okay, good. So now, oh yeah, so this is the very first slide. That was our very first slide from last week. I just want to come back again just to look at it. And now that I look at it, I think there's a mistake on the slide. Let me check my calendar here. Look at June. Let's see. So June 6th is the first Tuesday. June 20th is the second Tuesday. So now I correct this slide in real time. Because, you know, 2 plus 14 is 16, 6 plus 14 is 20, not 23. Okay, so now that's better. All right. All right, so this is just the, and also I'm going to minimize people's faces so that the slide can be seen. This is just the schedule for the chant that we're working on right now, the Homage to the Three Jewels. We've already had our first meeting. And in that meeting, in the first discussion of the Homage to the Three Jewels chant, we talked about the overall structure, the 5 fragrances, and the incense offering, which is the beginning of the chant. And I'm going to go over the overall structure of the chant again tonight. And then for the second, this being the second, and the third, which will be the next class, we'll talk about the middle of the chant, which is what the section is called the 7 prostrations. And then the end of the chant is a fairly brief, but quite a nice ending for the chant, the great aspiration, which is this down here, the great aspiration. We solely desire that the infinite 3 jewels receive with great love and great compassion our reverent homage, filling us from within and clothing us with their divine power, and that all the beings of the Dharma realm, all together at the same time, attain the Buddha way. So that's a good way to end a chant. Okay. Now this is just to kind of briefly look again at the overall structure of the chant. This is the part that we covered last week, these first 3 lines. Yehyang, Zhonghyang, Yehyang, Heital Hyang, Heital Jigyon Hyang, Guangyang Wunde, Jubyan Bobge, Gongyang Shibang, Muryang Bobopsong, Honhyang Jinon, Om Bara Tobia Hom, 3 times. Okay, so that's turned out to be the 5 fragrances. Each place where you see Hyang, which shows up a lot, Hyang, 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 Hyang. This is the Sino-Korean word for fragrance. Sino-Korean meaning it's actually a Chinese word, but it's the Korean pronunciation of it. Over half of the words in the Korean language are loan words from Chinese, which is not that unusual in language. So many words in English were borrowed from French or some other non-English source back during, back in the day. But it's beginning over 1,000 years ago. Anyway, and so Hyang then is a Korean word that is really the Korean pronunciation of the Chinese word meaning fragrance. And these 5 fragrances are actually the fragrances of the 5 skandhas in their purified form, which we talked about the last meeting. And then this is the incense offering mantra. So this is often this chant often comes at the beginning or close to the beginning of a practice session, and I always look up on the altar when I'm leading practice. I always look up on the altar when we're chanting this mantra to make sure that I've remembered to light some incense. Except for when I'm not lighting incense. Sometimes I don't light incense. Sometimes it irritates Beth. But anyway, so tonight we're going to start talking about this part that's kind of highlighted in green with the green arrows, the 7 prostrations. That's just to kind of orient us here. Now I'm going to move ahead to the slides that we're going to be covering tonight. Oh yeah, okay. So this is a, I think I'm not skipping over anything. Oh yeah, no. Okay, no, we'll start with this slide. Okay, so this is 4 examples of chants different chants, two from our tradition, from the Korean tradition, and two from Theravada Buddhism. Um, so these and these are all different ways of paying homage to the three jewels in a chanted poetic form. So this is actually these three lines here come at the very end of a much longer chant that I might talk a little bit about tonight. I've mentioned before, called the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra. So that's this little key down here. It tells you which one of these. One is from the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra. It's from the end, the very end of the Thousand Hands and Eyes Sutra. Two is from Kwanzaa Bosal chanting. So I know both of you are at least somewhat familiar with Kwanzaa Bosal chanting. This is actually the beginning when we chant Namu Bota Bujum Guangnim Bope, Namu Dama Bujum Guangnim Bope, Namu Sunga Bujum Guangnim Bope. This is we bow to the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha who bring their light to this Dharma assembly. The Dharma assembly being us practicing together. So these are two fairly short examples of in chant form paying homage to the three jewels, and these are two longer forms in Pali from the Theravada Buddhist tradition. The point here being there's many different ways, many different chanting or ritualistic ways of paying homage to the three jewels. And what we're studying now, what we're talking about, is the homage to the three jewels, which is a there's a much longer Pali, not much longer, but called the Ratana Sutta, which is a very nice, but quite a bit longer, a little longer than homage to the three jewels. Anyway, the homage to the three jewels is a kind of a medium-sized chant for paying homage to the three jewels, and it takes a while. People usually do it fairly slowly. You don't have to do it all that slowly, but all right. Now, before I get back into the text of the homage to the three jewels, I want to talk a little bit more about kind of the context for this discussion and these classes, which is the place of chanting in our practice. When for each of these classes begins with the Great Dharani, which is the chant that was Zen Master Sung San's core practice. That's what he did all the time. Was constantly saying the Great Dharani, even when he was talking to someone or walking or whatever. He was always doing the Great Dharani in his mind. Now, so this is a quote from a book, a really nice book actually. Robert Buswell is one of the most important authors to be familiar with if you're interested in learning more about the Korean Buddhism. He spent, I believe, 5 years, maybe more, in Korea as a monk, and left when the funny story, he left Korea when he realized that his teacher had planned the rest of his life for him, and it kind of freaked him out. He came back, flew back to the United States, and became a professor of Buddhist studies. And he's written some great books. This is where we talk too much about this slide, but just the point of this slide is that for people who consider themselves in Korea hardcore Zen practice monks, which is a small minority of Buddhist monks in Korea, consider themselves really hardcore meditation monks. They call themselves meditation monks, and they don't do chanting. So as not to interrupt their sitting schedule, monks in the meditation hall, that is, monks who are quote meditation monks unquote, monks in the meditation hall do not attend the regular morning and evening services in the main Buddha hall. The only ritual activity in which they are involved is the noon service before dinner. So one of the reasons why I want to point that out is because Zen Master Sung San placed a great deal of emphasis on chanting practice because it was his practice. And because he through his own experience realized the great potential for chanting practice. And so the idea that chanting, or so when in this previous slide when they referred to the regular morning and evening services in the main Buddha home, basically that's chanting, hour or 2 hours of chanting. And so the idea that that interrupts one's practice is antithetical to Zen Master Sun San's style of teaching. So the background story for that is that only 10 days after Sun San became a monk, he did his first retreat, and it was a chanting retreat that he did. It was a solo chanting retreat. He chanted the Great Dharani for 20 hours a day, and for 100 days, and that's how he attained enlightenment. And it's a really interesting story. If you just Google Sung San Great Dharani, you'll find different versions of the story, but it's usually pretty consistent. And like I said, even when he was sitting silently, sitting in silent sitting meditation, he would be doing the Great Dharani silently. He didn't just teach people the Great Dharani, he also taught the chants that we're covering in this class series, except for there's one exception to that, which is the Kanon Sutra, which is a chant that is usually thought of as being associated with the Japanese tradition, but it's actually originally a Chinese chant. So which is all of the chants that we're studying from the Korean tradition are either originally Chinese chants or are versions of originally Chinese chants, versions that evolved in Korea. And even as the chants kind of evolved and changed in Korea, they remained in Chinese. All right, so the chants that Zen Master Sung San taught to his students are not just chants that Buddhist monks and nuns in monasteries are chanting as part of their morning and evening services. They're also practiced throughout Korea by lay Buddhists in their own homes. And this is something that I think I talked about this at the last time, but it's very popular in Korea to buy little booklets that have lots and lots of chants in them. And the booklets not only have the chants, they give some background, they give basically a lot of the kind of material that I'm trying to present in these classes. And they tell you how to do it, basically. And one of the things that they emphasize in these little booklets that you can buy, which I mean they cost usually they're less than $5, or less than $3 in some cases. But they emphasize that that chanting is a practice that you can do even by yourself. So you don't have to be living in a temple or a Zen center. You don't have to be sitting with a group of people who are chanting. You can do it on your own. And you shouldn't, and as I already mentioned, you definitely shouldn't think of chanting as something that interrupts your sitting practice. You shouldn't put them against each other. I mean, time is time, though. So if you spend time chanting, you'll spend, you either add that on, or you might. Anyway, I don't want to get too much into the logistics of it, but we can talk about that, how you incorporate chanting practice in your daily practice. But the main thing is that you work it out yourself. You find what is helpful to you, what you're interested in. It's good to experiment and try things. And one thing I do want to point out is that if, for example, you do only chanting practice as your daily practice, then you'll be doing the same thing that Zen Master Sung San was doing when he attained enlightenment. So it's not like you're missing something by chanting instead of sitting. And in fact, ideally, when you do chanting practice, it's good to be sitting on your, wherever you would be sitting, whatever you would be doing to kind of do your sitting practice. You are kind of arranged the same way to do your chanting practice. It's good to be sitting in meditation posture, etc. So the Yebol chant, Yebol is the name of the homage to the three jewels in Korean. Is usually one of the first chants that's done by a group practicing together, or as part of an individual's personal practice. In the books that I was mentioning before, they usually have it like at the beginning, start with this. And the reason for that, of course, is that taking refuge is the traditional way of starting any kind of practice. So even if you're just going to sit, it's good to do some kind of refuge taking when you're sitting down to do silent sitting meditation. And one other thing that is important, if you're familiar with Korean Buddhism, if you're familiar with Zen Master Seung San and people who are kind of in his orbit or associated with him or his students, you'll hear people refer to the Jogye order. I don't know, have you heard people refer to the Jogye order, Deborah? Or Camille? Okay, so the Jogye order is the largest Buddhist group in Korea, but it's only one. And it's often presented, and I don't mean this as a criticism of Jogye order. Some of my best friends are in the Jogye order, but it's often presented as Korean Buddhism, or as synonymous with Korean Buddhism. But in fact, there are other groups. There's the Taego order. There is One Buddhism. There's other groups. When Zen Master Seung San started the Kwanum School of Zen, Kwanum School of Zen is not part of the Jogye order. That's an international organization that Zen Master Seung San started. Some of the teachers who trained under Zen Master Seung San, like my teacher, our teacher, Zen Master Daegak, decided to leave the Kwanum School of Zen, which is something that Zen Master Seung San said was perfectly fine to do, especially for people who had like Zen Master Daegak, who had become Zen masters. He said, once you become a Zen master, you can go off on your own, which is what Zen Master Daegak did. So the chants that we're talking about in this class don't belong to any particular organization or group or sect. They are part of the Korean Buddhist tradition in the broadest sense. And oh yeah, over here, let's see, here's a little Chinese lesson. These are the characters for Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, three jewels, and great love, great compassion. So it's Bul Bop Song. Bul Bop Song is the Korean way of saying Buddha, Dharma, Sangha. Sambo is three jewels, and Deja Debi is great love, great compassion, which is it's a traditional name for Avalokiteshvara or Kwanse Boso or Kuan Yin. It's also a traditional name for Amitabha Buddha and for really all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and the three jewels in general. Okay, so just checking out the time. All right, now, over the history of Korean Buddhism, how-to books have been written to help Buddhist practitioners to learn how to chant. So I refer to these inexpensive little books that you can buy now. If you know Korean, you can go to Korean websites and just buy them online very easily. I don't know enough Korean to safely purchase anything from a Korean language website. I wouldn't necessarily know what I was doing, know exactly how much I was paying or what I was actually going to get. But even before modern days, Korea is also South Korea. And usually, when I say Korea, I'm talking about South Korea. Is one of the most technologically advanced countries in the world. South Korean people are very, very connected to the internet. If you become a Buddhist nun or a monk in Korea today, you learn these chants by downloading MP3 files to your phone and listening to the recordings in that way. But before there was the internet, before there was MP3 files, back in the 1930s, a book was published in Korea called this is the Essential Compendium for Buddhists, a Modern Buddhist Liturgy, or Buljab Pilam for short in Korean. It was first published in the early 1930s, um, and it has been translated into English and is freely available. So you can just go if you know where it is, and I'll put a link in the description to this video. Um, if you ever want to know almost uh, well, a lot about Korean Buddhist chanting and rituals and ceremonies. It's all in there. It can be a lot to wade through, but it's really wonderful that the Choge Order has translated this and made it freely available to people. It is a real great resource for anybody who wants to know more about Korean Buddhist practices. Now, according to the English translation of the Buljab Pilam, it gathers together various sutras, worship liturgies, and dharani, essential to Korean Buddhist ceremonies. The introduction goes on to say that we can call this book a guide informing Buddhists as to how Buddhist faithful should worship daily, what they should read and recite, and what liturgies to chant when making offerings. Um, Now, I mentioned Robert Buswell, another person to look out for who's a really important scholar who writes good stuff about Korean Buddhism is a guy named Richard McBride. He wrote an article describing the Buljab Pilam, um, uh, and his article was called "Must Read Texts for Buddhists" because that's actually one of the ways of explaining what the Buljab Pilam is supposed to be about, that it is a collection of the must-read texts for Buddhists. And Richard McBride said it was a practical and essential manual, and this is one of the reasons why I like this quote, for both lay and monastic Buddhists in its articulation of appropriate ritual for the gamut of Buddhist practice associated with all the major and minor figures venerated in most monasteries, temples, and shrines. And I just had to put in brackets, I added myself, and in the homes of lay Buddhists as well. More important, the compilation reveals the central role of dharani and mantra in everyday practice of Korean Buddhism. So, speaking of everyday, so this is if you know a little bit of Korean and a little Chinese, you can go searching for mantras and dharanis, and you can find things like the Wish Come True travel mug, which has this writing here is talismanic writing. Down here, this is Hangul. This is Korean writing, and this is I've written it again down here. This is So Won Song Chui, which means so it can be translated as "make your wishes come true." So "make your wishes come true" is kind of I would not consider that to be the best way of translating it. It is accomplishing your great aspirations. So in a Buddhist context, your wish that you want to come true is to save all beings, right? The wish, and I will now go back to the first slide. This is the major wish that Buddhists have. We solely desire that the infinite three jewels receive with great love and great compassion our reverent homage, filling us from within and clothing us with their divine power, and that all the beings of the Dharma realm, all together at the same time, attain the Buddha way. So that's our wish. Let's see if I can do this more quickly. Actually, not very good at PowerPoint. Here we go. Okay. But I just thought it was cool that you can get, because it's very common, and I'll show a picture of it on the next slide. It's very common to get little yellow pieces of paper with the red writing on them. That's considered to be, red writing on yellow paper is considered, the more powerful form for if you want to have a mantra or a dharani that's really going to work. but you can also get it on a coffee cup. I was looking to find a phone case for my new phone. I just got a new phone. I was hoping to get a wish come true phone case, but they don't have them for the phones that I have. All right, I keep looking at the time. Make sure that we break on time. Now, in the Bulja Pilam, this book that was written in the early 1930s, it wasn't the first time. So this was part of so a previous major compendium had been published about 100 years earlier, authored by Bekpa Gungsong, who was one of the most important Zen teachers of the late Joseon period, and he was also a founder of the Hwanam school. Going back even further, one of the most important works of Sosan Taisa. Now, Sosan Taisa is like the Abraham Lincoln and George Washington put together of Korean Buddhism. He's both a really central figure in the history of Korean Buddhism, and he's also a great national hero for all Korean people. And he composed a book on chanting practice, or practice in general. It's a guide to practice, how to practice at home or in a temple or with a small group of people. Now, Jung Myung Kim is a guy. I really like people who write articles about Korean Buddhism and then make them available for free download on the internet, so that, because otherwise I don't have access to them. So Jung Myung Kim wrote an article on Hujong's. So Hujong is another name for Sosan Taisa. Sosan Taisa was this very important Zen master and national hero who lived at the very end of right around 1600. He died just in 1604. And he lived at a time when there was a lot of activity, a lot of Buddhist ritual texts, that is, how-to guides, how to do Buddhist practices and ceremonies were being written at this time. And one of the things, and recall that Richard McBride, in the article I was just, one thing that Richard McBride points out in his article on the Bulja Pilam, this book that we're talking about, this book that is kind of a general guide to Korean Buddhist chanting practice, Korean Buddhist practice in general. Lots of dharanis, lots of mantras, which are kind of the same thing. I should talk about that a little bit. But one of the reasons for the prominence of mantras and dharanis in these books that are directed at the broad Buddhist community on how to do Buddhist practices, one of the reasons why mantras and dharanis are so prominent in these books is that people like them. So one thing that was going on in the Joseon dynasty was that Buddhism had gone from being the official supported court religion of the Korean emperor to being not that anymore. Sometimes it's said that Buddhism was actually being persecuted. It wasn't so much being persecuted as just simply being not supported. So the Confucians were in power, and in particular, these were Confucians who did not like Buddhism. And so there wasn't a lot of what we would really consider to be, hardcore persecution. But Buddhists had to fend for themselves. Buddhist institutions had to fend for themselves. And not only did the government no longer support them, but the wealthy classes, the aristocrats, didn't support the Buddhist temples, the monks, the nuns, the groups, the buildings. They had to get support from the commoners. And the common people weren't necessarily just poor peasants, but they included that. But among ordinary Korean lay Buddhists, basically, also known as commoners, they liked mantras and dharanis, and so this had a strong influence on the development of Korean Buddhism, and also had a strong development on the things that Korean Buddhist teachers wrote about for their students, because this was what their students were interested in asking for. Okay, so at this point, I want to take a 5-minute break, um, and then come back and talk more about. We'll get more into the nitty gritty of the chant itself. Get back to talking about that. Okay, all right. So we'll take a 5-minute break starting now. So, left off somewhere around here. And yeah, we're done with this slide. Except this, I just want to point out, this is a more traditional looking wish fulfillment amulet that is not put on a coffee mug, travel mug, just not the traditional way. So, this slide I'm going to skip over mostly, just that it has some more quotes from this Bulja Pilam from the early 1930s. This is kind of a precursor to a modern day chanting book. You know, like, oh, I have a chanting book right here. So here's my chanting book. This is a chanting book that I have. It just has a bunch of chants in it all together. These days, you don't really need that. All you need is like, you know, some PDF files you can download onto your phone. But let's move on to here. All right, now we're going to get back to the actual chant itself. So there, in the previous class, we talked about the opening part of the chant, which culminates with the incense offering mantra. And then following that, there are 7 prostrations or bows that are done. So actually it would be good to just kind of briefly look at what is being bowed to in those 7 prostrations. So 7 prostrations are to first Shakyamuni Buddha, then all the Buddhas, then the Dharma. Okay, so we've got Buddha twice. Once says the specific as our Buddha, you know, our Buddha, Shakyamuni Buddha. Then there's all the Buddhas. Then there's the Dharma. And then at the end, finally, we get to the Sangha. Before that, we go through the 4 great bodhisattvas, which we'll talk about this time and in the next class. Talk about a number of important students of Buddhism, saints and disciples, a number of important teachers in the history of Buddhism, and then the Sangha. So that makes up the 7 different things or entities or beings that we're prostrating to. And that, it turns out, probably won't talk about this this week or this time, but that's an abbreviated list. So for example, instead of the 4 great bodhisattvas, you could do the 8 great bodhisattvas. Okay, but for each of these prostrations, each of the 7 prostrations begins with the same phrase, the same words, Jishin Guimyong Ye, which literally means sincere mind, prostrate, life, ritual. And Ye, and we talked about this some in the last class, the name for this chant in Korean is Ye Bo. So Ye, all these Ye's, Jishung Guimyong Ye, which you say over and over again, or over and over again, 7 times in this chant, is part of the reason why this chant is just called Ye Bo. Now, the literal word for word meaning, sincere mind, the prostrate, gui, this means prostrate or subdue or submit to, or Myong literally means life, and Ye means a lot of different things in Chinese. These 2 words together, Jishim, just means sincere mind. These 3 words taken together means to take refuge in. And one of my favorite internet resources for learning about Buddhist things is the Digital Dictionary of Buddhism, which tells us that this 5-character phrase in Chinese means wholeheartedly taking refuge. And you'll find this is kind of a common formula that's found in many different practices going all the way many centuries. There's chants by Xuanzang, who was the guy who wrote the version of the Heart Sutra that we chant. He wrote many other texts for practice and other translations. He composed his own little text for paying homage to Maitreya Buddha, which contains this phrase many times. Even earlier than that, Tan Luan, who was a very, very early Chinese Pure Land Buddhist teacher, wrote a praise for Amitabha, in which this phrase occurs over and over again. And there's another similar phrase that also shows up a lot in Buddhist chants or prayers or practices, which is instead of Ji Shim Gui Myong Yang, Ji Shim Gui Myong Yang, Il Shim Gui Myong, which means surrender with one heart. And so here's so I just did it. I took these 4 characters, I did a Google search on it, and I looked for pictures. I like to do Google image searches in Chinese characters. This was from some group. It's a group of Chinese Pure Land Buddhists have a Facebook page, and they have this image on their Facebook page: Il Shim Guimyong Amitabha, which means with one heart I pay homage and bow to Amida Buddha. And so when we chant this over and over again in the homage to the 3 jewels, this is a very well-worn and this means to take refuge. And the homage to the 3 jewels, homage, we say homage, another word for homage in Buddhism is to take refuge in. And so, let's see. Now, when we got back from the break, I did not ask if there were questions on anything that we had covered so far, which I meant to ask. Are there questions on anything we've covered up to this point, or anything that has been covered that you're wondering about or want to ask about or talk about that hasn't been mentioned? Fine to bring up things that I haven't even mentioned. Oh, okay, all right. So there are 7 prostrations. Now, often in Korean Buddhism, when they say prostration, they mean prostration, full prostration, standing all the way up, bowing all the way down, head to the floor. When I first started practicing in this tradition, that's how I did it. It can be very awkward if you're in a group of people and if you don't have a lot of space, like in my living room. If you have more than 3 or 4 people and people are doing these full prostrations, you have to be careful. I mean, literally, if people are standing on opposite ends of the room, and if it's not quite big enough, you'll have people clunk their heads together like the 3 Stooges when they're bowing. I've gotten away from that for 2 reasons. One, because it's difficult to have enough space, and it's a little awkward, and also because I have bad knees, and so doing full prostrations, I actually can do 3 full prostrations. It doesn't hurt me too much, but it is difficult for me to do full prostrations, and also I just think it makes it easier. So there's a third reason, which is that it's a lot of choreography. You have to know when to stand, when to go down, how to do it, when to go back up again, and it's a lot easier for everybody to just sit and bow. Which is how I prefer to do it now for all the reasons I just mentioned. Although some people probably, quite possibly, a lot of people would consider that to be not really, correct. Well, but the one thing is, this particular chant has evolved a great deal over time. So, like I said before, what we're doing is already a short version. Doing these 7 prostrations. If you actually, the book that I was just talking about, the Bulja Pilam, which is a guidebook to how to do Buddhist practice. It was written about 100 years ago in Korea. Their version of the Homage to the Three Jewels is about twice as long as the one that we do. It includes Maitreya Buddha. It includes lots of bodhisattvas that are mentioned in ours, and it has, it has more prostrations, more Jishim Guimyong Yes in it, and so this is a shorter version. Oh, that's another reason. That's another thing that is a slight advantage to doing just the sitting bows with this practice. It doesn't take quite as long. The standing bows are a little time consuming for people to get all the way down and then get all the way back up again. Anyway, so for the first three prostrations are to Shakyamuni Buddha, all the Buddhas, and the Dharma. But in the chant, it isn't just, we don't just say Shakyamuni Buddha, all the Buddhas, and the Dharma. We say, so this is after, for each of these three lines, this is after we say Jishim Guimyong Ye, which is, basically I pay, with wholehearted sincerity, I pay homage to. And then the first thing that is being paid homage to is the three realms, great teacher, the four lives, loving father, be my original teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. So these are kind of three epithets of the Buddha: the great teacher of the three realms, the four lives, loving father. I'm still trying to, I've probably found this somewhere at one time, but I'm not really sure what this is specifically referring to. And of course, referring to Shakyamuni Buddha as our original teacher is, that's basically what makes you a Buddhist, if Shakyamuni Buddha is your original teacher. And so the character for original here is really the character for root. This is a picture of a tree with a little line across the bottom, kind of emphasizing the bottom part of the tree. That's the character for root. And so that's the first prostration to the, so here I've just given kind of the, this sort of literal, maybe not extremely helpful, yes, here we are. Yeah. So if you go to, I'm going to give a plug for my blog here. My blog is not very good, okay? It is basically, I think of things and I go, oh, and I write them down. I kind of slap them onto my blog. But this is an entry that I did that's a little bit more well thought through. So this is my blog is, that didn't work. I get to read my email. I don't want people reading my email. Okay, all right. So this is, here it is. Yeah, my blog is mindisbuddha.org. And if you go to that blog and you do here's the search. Oh yeah, here's the search. This is how I got to this blog post, Yable, or Homage, or anything else. But the reason why I want to come here is just because this has a little bit better explanation of what each of these lines means. So the very first line, we sincerely pay homage to the master of the three realms, the loving father of the four lives, who is our root teacher, Shakyamuni Buddha. Which is kind of just making it into more grammatical English than just a literal character by character translation. It'll help a little bit more in the next line, where we say, I'm going to go back into the slideshow mode. Yeah, all right. We pay homage to the 10 directions, 3 worlds, Indra's net, land, ocean, forever dwell all Buddha's noble gathering. So a better translation of that is, we sincerely pay homage to all the sacred Buddhas who, like Indra's net, pervade all the lands and oceans of the 10 directions and the 3 worlds. Okay, So that's kind of a more um, meaningful grammatical English translation of this part here. Uh, and then again, the next one is very, very similar. The next line is, we sincerely pay homage to all the sacred dharmas, which like Indra's net pervade all the lands and oceans of the 10 directions and the 3 worlds. All right, so that's the first 3 uh, prostrations. Um, any questions on that? So one thing, if you're interested, you can go look at my blog. Go to mindisbuddha.org. I'll put a link to it in the description when this video is uploaded to YouTube. I'll also send a link to it, a direct link to the particular blog post that I'm talking about. When I do upload the video to YouTube, I'll send out an email to everybody who's on the emailing list saying, hey, the video is up. But it's kind of interesting to look through. Let's see. Oh yeah. So some of these phrases are in, the Heart Sutra. If you're interested in the Heart Sutra, some things you might recognize from other places. If you, I know Deborah took the class that I taught on the 4 Great Vows. Some of these characters are in the 4 Great Vows, and so some of these things are just characters that you can begin to recognize. It's good to know the character for Buddha, I guess. If you, let's see, Indra's net comes up here. And so one of the things that's good about learning these chants is that in the process of learning these chants, so the last time we met, we talked about the opening of the chant, which discusses the 5 fragrances. And we went through these 5 fragrances, and actually it was kind of, at least for me, it was a real learning process when we went through that. And I want to go back and just kind of revisit that because even once I discovered that the 5 fragrances were the fragrance of Sila, which is precepts or discipline, Samadhi, which is sometimes just translated as meditation, Prajna, which is sometimes just translated as wisdom, Moksha, which is often just translated as freedom or liberation, and knowledge of moksha, which is the 5th fragrance. Even once I'd found out that that's what these fragrances were, it took me quite a bit more digging to discover that this particular list of 5 things, Sila, Samadhi, Prajna, Moksha, and knowledge of moksha, is a traditional Buddhist teaching about how the 5 skandhas have the 5 skandhas have a purified form, and that the purified form of the skandha of form is precepts. The purified form of the skandha of feelings. I always have to think of the Heart Sutra when I think of the skandhas: forms, feelings, perceptions, impulses, consciousness. So form, when purified, is precepts or correct behavior. Feelings, when purified, is samadhi. Perceptions, when purified, is prajna. Impulses, when purified, is moksha. And consciousness, when purified, is knowledge of moksha. Whatever knowledge of moksha is, I still am working on that. But that actually has helped me. I've always been puzzled about the 5 skandhas, to tell you the truth. It's never been, because to me, it's never been obvious why it was that the Buddha said that he examined the 5 skandhas and found them to be empty, therefore there's no self. That at least to me, it's not obvious why the 5 skandhas are the place that one would go looking for the self. Although I do understand the body, which is the first skandha, the skandha of form, and mind, which is the fifth skandha, the skandha of consciousness. And then the other three skandhas are kind of in between, I guess. Anyway, let's go back to the, I think this is all the slides that I have so far, which is a good thing. Is there another slide there? No, there isn't. I guess I have a blank slide at the end. But in going through these three lines, going through and looking at things like the three realms, I remember not too long ago, we were talking about another, I think we were talking about the Heart Sutra, and someone, it was either Deborah or Elizabeth, said, "What are the three realms?" and I didn't know for sure. I thought I thought I knew, but it turned out that there was a lot more to it than what I had been assuming. So going through things like learning what the three realms are, I'm still trying to figure out what the four lives of the four lives loving Father means. I'm pretty sure I know what root teacher means. Oh, the one thing that's interesting. Oh yeah, yeah. One thing that's interesting let me see if we have time to talk about this. Yes, we do. So, in the chants, usually you'll see a Buddha as just a bull, and Dharma as just bull, and Sangha as just sum. But in this part, in this chant, the Buddha is a bull ta, and then there's Ya Jung, which means noble gathering. Jung is the character for is part of the character for sentient beings in Korean. Yeah, and Dharma is Dhamma, and then when we get to the last line, we'll see that Sangha is Sangha.
Could I jump in?
Oh yeah, sure. Go ahead, Camille.
I was just thinking about what you were saying on the four lives loving Father. And I know when pronounced, at least in Mandarin, four sounds very, very similar to the word death. And so I would assume the character is different. No, but I wonder if that might.
That's why four is bad luck, right? So you know some you know some Mandarin, huh, Camille? Okay.
A little bit, a very, very, very little bit.
Four is bad luck.
Yes, but I was just wondering if and I don't know, but if when this was originally kind of composed, if people were saying it out loud, they sound incredibly similar. And so I wonder if that is, I assume, I don't know much about the characters. I would assume they're different, but the pronunciation of it, if people weren't necessarily writing it, but they were pronouncing it, I just wonder if that kind of lends itself to a different interpretation on like birth and death and sort of the Buddha overseeing that. Does that?
Yeah. That's an interesting point. So that's kind of making me wonder now, because in Buddhism in Buddhism there are lots of lists. There's the two of these and the three of these and the four of those and the five of this, six, and there's lots of things that come in fours, and that doesn't seem to have any negative connotation at all in Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths. What else? There's lots of fours. Now I can't think of any but the Four Noble Truths, but there are lots of fours, and it doesn't seem to be a bad thing. But yeah, I have heard this about because four sounds like death, it's considered bad, and I don't know. I did look that up at one time. Let's see if I can find anything here.
And this is just conjecture. I certainly don't know for certain, but that's what it made me think of when you were talking about it.
Yeah. Well, it's Chinese is an extremely interesting language. And one of the things that you find is that every character has a lot of different meanings, And sometimes when you put two characters together, it means something that you would not suspect. And also, Chinese love little phrases that are very difficult to translate. Um, anyway, so I don't know which one it's going to turn out to be here. The four, yeah, no. So I am working on a longer blog post where I go through like all of these characters and phrases, and I just all I have down is just basically great teacher of the three realms, loving father of the four lives, to be continued. I haven't I haven't sorted that one out yet, but that uh, it is. Um, So sometimes people, and I didn't really talk about this in this class, but sometimes people are not interested in knowing what the chants mean. They just want to do the chant as just to do it. And actually, to some extent, Zen Master Song San even encouraged that attitude, and a number of the people who trained under him definitely encouraged that attitude. I think people are missing out on a lot when they don't know what they're chanting, and there's a lot of really basic, interesting Buddhist teaching that's embedded in these chants, and that's kind of the point. All of these chants are either direct quotes from teachings of the Buddha himself, or they are paraphrases of Buddhist teachings that have been put together by people who are both great Buddhist teachers and great poets. And so it's really cool, I think, to find out what these chants mean. And although it can be a little daunting, or extremely daunting, um, but I mean, if one thing that is fairly easy to realize about the chants when you learn them is that they are quite beautiful as poetry. Just the sound itself is quite beautiful. Um, but the meaning can be quite interesting too. So we've gotten to the point where, speaking of the way the chants sound, we should do the homage to the three jewels as our closing. And so I'm going to stop sharing just for a minute while I figure out where the recording is. Where did everybody go? There you are. Okay, good. Okay, here we are. Okay, so now I'm going to share my screen again, and we will do the chant, and then come back and just say goodbye. And or if anybody has any last minute things that they want to ask or talk about at the end, we can do that too. But let's do the chant first.
시방 삼세 제망차례 상주 일체 불사야중 지심기명예 시방 삼세 제망차례 상주 일체 달마야중 지심기명예 대지문수 사리보사 대행보현보사 대비관세음 보살 대원본존 지장보살 마하산 지심기명예 영산당시 수불루초 십태제자 십육성 오백성덕수성 내지 천이백 제다란 무량성중 지심기명예 성공동진구바해동 역대전동 제대조사 천하정사 일체미진수 제대 선지시 지심기명예 시방 삼세 제망차례 상주 일체 승가야중 유언무진삼보 대자대비 수화정예명훈가비력 원공법계제중생 자타 일시 성불도
Thanks, everybody, for coming.
Thank you.
I had a good time.
Thank you.
I hope
It
everyone
was
else
nice
did
to
too.
meet you, Camille.
Nice to meet you as well.
Yeah, great to see everybody.
Good
And
night.
see you next time.
Okay.